Hello, John. How is it going?
Great, Dr. Ben. Great to see you.
Is there a pool near you? Or, I mean, I
There
love the
is.
shirt, but I don't see a whistle, so I don't feel like you're on duty.
I'm not on duty. I used to be a lifeguard in my youth. I'm still a swimmer. I swim here in Austin at Barton Springs Pool, which is part of an aquifer. So it's natural water. It's like being in a lake, and it's the same temperature all year long, which is a little cold, but it certainly wakes you up.
And no fish, I assume? Or
Not in that area, but there's turtles and fish further down outside of the pool area. But you swim and you see the kelp and things like that. I heard research about taking a cold shower burns fat and fights depression and reduces inflammation. But it had me at burns fat, so I take cold showers. And so now going to Barton Springs, I'm like, I don't even need to work out. I just swim in cold water all the time.
that's actually a nice little tip. I may fill my bathtub up after this call and tread some water for a little bit. So if our listeners are just joining, we have John with us today is a master storyteller, and I mean he can tell his story better than I can. So, John, can you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am known as the pitch whisperer, and I help salespeople tell stories because I've been in sales a lot of my career, and I realized that you can't just push out information. The big myth in storytelling, Ben, is that people feel like, oh, you got to get people to know, like, and trust you. And we've heard that forever. The problem is that belief causes people to push out information. You have to get to know me and my company and my product. So here's a bunch of stuff. Do you know enough now to buy? And that never works. So I flip it and I say, we have to start with trust. It's a gut thing. Remember when we used to shake hands? Well, the reason the handshake was I don't have a weapon in my hand. And so now trust is this a spam email or not? Is it safe to talk to you? So you need to build trust with social proof and introductions, and all that stuff transfers trust. And then from the gut, it goes to the heart. Do I like you? And here's the secret in selling and storytelling. The better you tell a story where you describe a problem that you have empathy for, the more people think you have their solution. So if you want to up your empathy factor, your likability factor, show that you have empathy for what the problem is. And then it goes to the head. And still, it's not a chance to push out information. Everyone has an unspoken question, Ben, when they hear you pitch anything. And it's this: will this work for me? You can tell me stories about all these other people you've worked with, but if I don't see myself in that story and see how it would work for me, I'm not going to buy. Yes, I might like and trust you, but that's the magic of storytelling, is it allows people to see themselves in that story and answer that unspoken question of, will this work for me? It does if I see myself in the story.
So just to rehash it to make sure that I understand it. So it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like initially it's it's not know about the product, it's know about you. So who are you?
Mm-hmm.
And like why do you care about what you're doing? And
Yes.
then do we relate to each other? Like, do you seem like you get me?
Mm-hmm.
And then how can whatever you're selling help me?
Exactly. And the
Hmm.
mistake most people make is they jump right into what the product or service is. And you need to first sell yourself. And that's telling your own story of origin of, as you said, why are you doing this? Why are you an architect? Why are you a lawyer? Whatever it is you're doing. And then you sell the company and what's their story of origin. Even if it's your own company, you have a name for it typically. There's some culture that you're creating. And then you go into telling about the product and the service through a story, not facts. So you sell yourself, the company, and then whatever it is you're selling.
I think what's so important, even if a listener isn't a salesperson like right now, this applies to getting a job. This applies, I think, to building friendships.
Yes.
This applies to dating. I think this structure of how am I presenting myself,
Mm.
especially in a day and age where all of the information about you and even about your company and about what you're selling is online and about your competitors too. So what does make you stand out? And I know you have some amazing material online about this, but can you share with us a little bit about your TED Talk that I got to watch because you so gratefully shared? I'll put the link in the comments too.
Sure. Well, it's called Be the Lifeguard of Your Own Life, because unlike in a hurricane, no one's going to come rescue us if we're stuck on a roof. And my whole story is about...
Wait, hold on. Superman's not going to come save me.
Sorry.
Or Superwoman?
Yeah.
Supergirl, Superwoman?
Whatever your fantasy is, yes, no. You got to be your own lifeguard.
Okay.
And, you know, I went through this myself when I was laid off after a 15-year career at Condé Nast. And I realized that I was going to have to reinvent myself. And so many people right now are dealing with disruption and fear of the unknown. And how do we embrace that? You know, I think we can all think about it in terms of, do I want to be like an ostrich and bury my head? Just let me know when the pandemic's over. Or be like a peacock and make ourselves big. The peacock makes itself big to scare off a predator. It happens to look beautiful doing it, but the purpose is that. And so we need to say, am I a peacock? I'm in business. I'm going to figure this out. Or are we going to be like an ostrich and bury our head?
Listening to some pretty good podcasts over the pandemic about how to create opportunities right now. And something that stuck for me was this idea of, you know, if you're still using the same messaging, if you're still selling with the same story that you used prior to everything, then you're missing out. You're really not connecting with what people are thinking and feeling right now. So what would you recommend for anyone selling or anyone that has messaging right now and hasn't changed it? And when it comes to like the global environment, the civil unrest, the election, the pandemic, I mean, everything that's going on right now, what should they do to ensure that they're connecting with their clients?
Well, I'm a big proponent of producing content that is extremely relevant. For example, I recently wrote an article on LinkedIn called 5 Things Salespeople Can't Do Now. And they can't go see their clients in person. They can't take them for a meal. They can't meet them at a trade show, and on and on and on. And then once you identify, oh, that's me, there's a lot of things I can't do, then you come up with some solutions. And then the problem is, for a lot of people, they're not comfortable on camera and selling on camera. So I give some tips on, that's a new need. You know, it's not just, oh, it'd be nice to look good, but one of my tips is stand up. Your energy changes. So even if you don't have a stand-up desk, put some books under your computer and make sure you're looking into a camera and that you have a good mic. The basics now of just being at the base level, people need to realize that you've got some professionalism going on. Doesn't mean you still can't be authentic and relaxed, but you need to sound and look good on Zoom calls or whatever the system is you're using. So the fact that you can't do it in person, to me, means that storytelling is more important now than ever. Because if you would go in and present and leave and people would forget what you say, imagine how much easier it is to forget what you say after a Zoom call, unless you're telling a story. Because stories make us memorable. When we tug at heartstrings in a story, then people are willing to open purse strings. And that is the secret there.
So how does someone go about finding out the story that they need to tell, right? Other than hiring you and maybe joining, getting your free PDF, which we'll talk about at the end. But what can someone do for themselves right now while watching us to start figuring out their story?
Well, I think the easiest place is just to start with your own story of origin. What made you become whatever it is you're doing? What is your passion? And really have that available, ready to go at a moment's notice. So you can say, well, I got inspired because my mom was a nurse, so now I'm in healthcare. Or I was a microbiologist, but I didn't want to spend my life behind a microscope, so now I'm selling this equipment. So anything that gives us a sense of who you were in the past that led you to this place now is really the first place to start. And there's all kinds of genres of storytelling too. So look at the different genres of storytelling. We can, there's the rags to riches story. Is that your story? There's the one where you're on a quest and you take people on the journey. So figure out what genre of story you might want to tap into and then really hone that story.
Now, is it better to pick the genre first, Or is it better to go through and evaluate your defining moments and the ups and downs and to map that out and get kind of the framework of your story and then see what fits?
Well, structure to a story is definitely important. And there's really definitely some steps. You need to paint the picture, the who, what, where, when. You need to describe a problem. You need to describe how you're solving it. And then the secret really here, Ben, is what is life like after you've solved that problem? So if we look at The Wizard of Oz, for example, imagine that movie ended with Dorothy getting in the balloon, the end, as opposed to that resolution part where she's back home, it's black and white again, and you were there and you were there, but I learned all these lessons about myself and life. There's no place like home. And the sense of appreciation for what she had, that's the resolution to the story. And that's what most people don't realize, how to do it and how important it is to have it.
I'm just thinking about the hero's journey. I have this really great book I enjoyed, Design is Storytelling. And it's just, the beginning, like every story, beginning, middle, end. And then there's a journey in between there. There is a hero, right? There is the enemy. There is the thing that you overcome. And then what is the final vision, the resolution, and what are our next steps? And it's like, so often it's like, we know this, like I know this, but how many times in my life have I sat down to write my stories that I'm going to be using in conversations? And I've done it, but I've not done it enough. That's for sure. And if all I'm doing is getting on a sales call and then trying to tell my story, like I probably won't be very practiced.
Right. This concept of I'll just figure it out and wing it versus somebody else who has a story ready to go. And it's not like a robot or over rehearsed. So there's one extreme or the other, not prepared and over prepared. That's where the real skill set is, almost like an athlete or a movie star. Right? They need to make you feel like that's the first time they're saying those words from the script. So they've obviously rehearsed it and memorized it, but they still are in the moment. So the ability to tell a story as if you're in it. For example, when I tell the story of meeting Michael Phelps, I talked to him about, I was able to convince Speedo to advertise in a fashion magazine I was selling ads for by painting a picture of treating their sportswear like it was fashion and having a fashion swimming pool with Michael Phelps there since he was on their payroll. And then at that event, I went up to him and I said, everyone says you're so successful because you've got feet like fins and your lung capacity is so big. I'm guessing there's something else. He said, yes, John. When I was younger, my coach said to me, Michael, are you willing to work out on Sundays? Yes, coach. Great. We just got 52 more workouts in a year than the competition. And then I asked my audience and my students, what are you willing to do that your competition isn't? So that's an example of storytelling. I've told that story before, but you'll notice the technique I use there is instead of just relaying the conversation I had with Michael Phelps in the past tense, I use dialogue as if we're talking to each other. Michael said to me, his coach said to him, and I use different frameworks. This is what I'm the coach, and I'm young Michael looking up at the coach. All of that is a skill set that allows people to see themselves and lean into your story.
My mind's just thinking right now and going through some stories. Yeah, it makes it so much more powerful than just saying, practice more.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to remember that. You're going to remember the story of Michael Phelps. Yes.
Yeah. And but to figure out those stories for yourself, like one, you just have to go live your life. You need to go start taking action, create opportunities for yourself. But then you need to log those experiences, or you sit down and try to remember what those experiences were. What do you recommend for someone to go through the history book, so to speak? Like, how do they find these gems? I don't imagine everyone has had a conversation with Michael Phelps or Larry King, or like the numerous amounts of people that you've had the opportunity to speak with and work with.
Well, I tell people, if you're looking for places to find your stories, look at the mistakes you've made in your life and lessons you've learned. Talk about a trip you went on that didn't go the way you expected, or a bad holiday meal with the family members. So there's all kinds of things that people can relate to. We've all been at Thanksgiving meals that didn't go so well. We've all had a plane ride that got delayed. We've all made mistakes in our lives. Sometimes your mess is in fact your message. I know recently here in Austin, I got invited to a private cocktail party that was outside, very small number of people. And I realized it's been 8 months since I've been to a cocktail party.
Wow.
And that muscle of going up to strangers and introducing myself was a little rusty. And after I knew like maybe 2 out of the 15 people. And after I talked to the 2 people that I knew, and then I was standing there for a minute, and I had that moment of anxiety, and I'm like, oh gosh, can I stay here another hour and a half? And I said to myself, just stay 5 more minutes and then see how you feel. And then after I got past that first 5 minutes of anxiety, then I found myself in another conversation and another conversation. And before I knew it, I was not the first person leaving. And so I'm writing a story about that, about how to fight your flight response. So that's just...
I can totally relate, by the way. You go to those networking events or you go to a cocktail party, even with 1 or 2 people you know, and you're excited about it, but I'm excited for about 20 minutes until I realize that I actually like start that small talk and go walk up to groups of people that I don't know and just be like, hey, how's it going, guys? Right. How's it going? What's and like try to avoid what do you do as much as possible.
Right.
And then after the first 2 or 3, it's like, oh, this is exhausting. I'm gonna go stand outside for a minute and look at my phone just to get away from all of this, to recharge. But then, like you said, you have this decision moment where you say, do I leave or do I stay? And I know if I stay, I'll figure it out and have some fun. But making that choice to stay is uncomfortable.
Well, that's why the takeaway of that is just break things down into small increments. Like, oh, I have to stay an hour and a half like this? No, the next 5 minutes, and then we can give you the out if you need it. That's the takeaway from that story. That's the resolution of that story. And also the tip I have is, instead of saying, hey, how's it going? Say, oh, how do you know the host? That's a nice, and then you show your story of how you know who you knew that got you here. So that's a little more inviting than, hey, how's it going?
Yeah, very much so. Very, very much so. And I love how you mentioned that it's pretty much a muscle that needs to be flexed. And I think everything in our life is a muscle that needs to be flexed. And if we're out of practice, it's going to at least feel off inside. It may not come out as off. And understanding that, oh, this is just my body telling me that it's been a while.
Yes.
That's okay.
And the good news is we have muscle memory, just like riding a bike, right? You're like, I know how to do this. It's been a while since I've been on the bike, especially for me growing up in the suburbs of Chicago. You didn't ride the bike all winter. And then you get back in the spring, you're like, oh yeah, I got this.
Okay, master of stories. So how can our listeners find out more about you?
Sure. Well, if anybody texts the word pitch, PITCH, to 66866, I'll send them my top storytelling tips of how to learn how to become not just a good storyteller, but a black belt in it. And you can go to my website. I'm johnlivesay.com, or just Google the Pitch Whisperer, and all my content comes up that way.
Did you have to battle with any baseball movies? Just curious.
I have not. No, I've actually
good.
The Pitch Whisperer, so I'm good.
Very, very good. Thank you so much, John, for today. It has been a pleasure. I learned some things. I'm sure our listeners learned some things. And I'm looking forward to diving into my stories.
Thanks, Dr. Ben.